why do we need to detoxify our bodies? First, let's take a look at the causes of death in the Philippines. According to the Department of Health in the Philippines, in 2009, the number one cause of death is heart disease and diseases of the vascular system. Number two is cancer, and number three is pneumonia. Surprisingly, in the United States, the causes of death are the same. That is, number one, heart disease, number two, cancer, and number three, chronic lower respiratory diseases. In fact, as we trace the causes of death in the Western world, we will find similar results in those countries as well. That leads us to the next question. Why are we dying from the same types of diseases and illnesses, even though we are continents apart with different standards of living and environment? Perhaps the answer lies in the next question. Do we have anything in common? The answer is yes. It's the food that we eat as well as the beverages that we consume. We drink too much soda and other sugary beverages. Soda contains a lot of sugar, and this is what happens when we boil it for a few minutes. Now, let's take a look at the effects of eating fast food.
So what happened when I ate a fast food meal? Well, something very simple. The contents enter your stomach, and I'm going to circle some of these contents that I call some of the killer contents of food. Sodium. These are fat molecules. These are refined sugar molecules. No big deal, right? Well, it is a big deal because when they hit your stomach, good things start happening, believe it or not. That's that dopamine release in your brain because dopamine and serotonin are going wild. You feel great. Oh my gosh, this tastes wonderful. It does, right? For the first few minutes. But things are also going on inside your body that aren't so great. Your pancreas is secreting more and more insulin to deal with that massive sugar overload from the fries, from the white bun, from the soda. Insulin does one thing. It drives sugar into cells. But it does something else. It tells your body to store fat. Why else would you have eaten a meal that big and that many calories unless you're about to go into hibernation? That's what you do when you hibernate. You grow a big belly. That fat that you see here, those fat cells actually grow in size. They start to secrete even more toxic substances, leading to heart disease, diabetes, and so many other things. All that sodium causes your blood pressure to go up, so your heart's beating twice as fast against twice as much resistance. And in your brain, you no longer are releasing dopamine, but instead, your brain is signaling you to release cortisol. Cortisol is a chronic stress hormone that ironically tells you to store even more fat. And last, but certainly not least, what isn't going on in my brain right now? I'm 30 minutes after my meal. There's no more dopamine. There's no more serotonin. I'm lethargic. I feel unhappy. I don't feel good about myself. And that is why when you first eat a fast food meal, you feel great. And 30 minutes later, you feel terrible.
What about the side effects of eating processed food and processed meat?
Processed meat, Bobby, is a scary thing. And that's not to mention what else they put in it to preserve it. They actually put a color fixer chemical in the processed meat to turn it red.
Americans want quick, cheap, convenient food. And if you look at the ingredient list on something like this, it's actually kind of scary. It starts off with high fructose corn syrup. And then the bologna is made from mechanically separated chicken and pork and corn syrup and modified food starch.
If you go buy a piece of processed meat, like sandwich meat, for example, at the grocery store, it may have been on that shelf for 3 or 4 weeks. It should be gray. People wouldn't buy it. They'd be sickened by it. So they use a chemical called sodium nitrite or sodium nitrate. This chemical, the USDA tried to ban this chemical in the 1970s. They were unsuccessful because of food industry lobbyists. It's still legal, and by the way, it causes cancer. It is such a powerful carcinogenic chemical that it belongs to a class of chemicals called nitrosamines that lab researchers actually inject into mice when they want to give them cancer so they can study the cancer.
What's the name of this?
Sodium nitrite or sodium nitrate. So they're eating cancer because it makes the meat look pretty.
If soda and sugary beverages, processed food, and fast food are unsafe, what about animal meat.
Dave Krunlagi of Dyersville, Iowa, told us he feeds antibiotics to his hogs before they get sick to accelerate growth and fend off diseases that can spread when livestock are raised in crowded conditions.
You give it to them because you want them to be healthy.
We must really rely on the science behind the issue.
But this week on Capitol Hill, critics worried giving antibiotics to livestock, unless medically necessary, may be creating dangerous drug-resistant bacteria that can be passed on to humans.
We would be shocked if a pediatrician ever ordered antibiotics for an entire nursery school class to keep the children from being infected.
The FDA, CDC, and the Department of Agriculture are now urging farmers to stop feeding antibiotics to healthy animals. But the industry is fighting back.
Our position is that these products have been approved as safe and effective by the FDA.
I am Stuart Levy.
This scientist first documented the problem more than 30 years ago after feeding 150 healthy chickens low levels of tetracycline for months.
By 1 week, almost all E. coli bacteria in the intestinal tracts of chickens were tetracycline resistant.
And by 3 months, Levy testified, the chickens were resistant to other classes of antibiotics as well. So were farm workers and members of the community.
There you go.
And this farmer told us he nearly died from a drug-resistant strain of strep after being gored by an angry boar fed a daily diet of penicillin.
That bug got stronger and tougher all the time.
The industry insists they're using antibiotics appropriately. But in our 4-month investigation, drug distributors and dozens of farm workers in 4 Farm Belt states told us antibiotic use to promote growth remains widespread on farms. And in this recent government survey, over 70% of farm workers admitted they used antibiotics for this purpose, most without consulting a veterinarian.
How safe are fish and seafood?
American consumers are often left wondering what's safe and what isn't. And when it comes to imported seafood, the answer may surprise you.
John Pruitt of WSB in Atlanta conducted an in-depth investigation and found, as that graphic would indicate, something fishy is going on. Here's his report.
What country is the shrimp from?
If you haven't noticed, almost all the seafood sold in supermarkets now comes from developing nations. Look closely. Tuna from Indonesia, orange roughy from China, tilapia from Costa Rica.
How come everything's from foreign countries?
Foreign fish is cheaper and it's taking over the U.S. market. 80% of all seafood sold in the U.S. is now imported.
Now, I don't think people have any idea how much imported seafood's coming into this country.
The FDA inspects and tests less than 1% of all seafood imports. And when it does, it frequently finds filthy fish and banned chemicals. FDA records show page after page of rejected shipments. Catfish from China, veterinary drugs. Swordfish from Vietnam, poisonous.
If it's from a foreign country, I'd be very cautious. I wouldn't eat it.
Ron Sparks knows what can be found in foreign fish. As Alabama's Commissioner of Agriculture, he's been to Vietnam and witnessed fish farmed in sewage. Sparks has ordered extensive testing of fish imports in Alabama, one of the few states with a seafood safety testing program. 50 to 60% of all fish imports in Alabama are rejected.
One of the things often found in this imported fish is a fungicide called malachite green. It's illegal to use in food because it causes cancer and birth defects.
Lab tests routinely detect antibiotics banned for use in food in the United States. Antibiotics are used to treat fish raised in crowded conditions that can breed bacteria, viruses, and parasites. Food safety advocates say the FDA is not doing enough to protect consumers.
Consumers may be getting a dose of antibiotics with their seafood dinner, and that's something that the government should stop.
Lab testers say fish farmers in nations like China play a cat-and-mouse game with them. When the lab rejects shipments for an illegal chemical, foreign fish farmers simply switch to another harmful chemical.
They know it's illegal, they know it hurts people, but they do it anyway.
How about fruits and vegetables?
Today we're talking about pesticides in your food, and I believe that eating organic fruits and vegetables is one of the best ways to avoid them. Now, to prove it, we conducted a very simple experiment. Went to a grocery store and we bought conventional and organic produce. And then we had them tested for pesticides. Here's what the lab found. we started with celery, just an example of what vegetables might be in our lives. We bought both organic and conventional celery, and we tested both for pesticides. In the organic celery, we found no detectable pesticide residue. In the conventional or non-organic celery, we found residues from 3 pesticides. 3 different types of pesticides were found, which means that these vegetables, even after being picked and shipped and processed, still had toxins in them, and you're bringing this into your home. Now, for fruits, we chose peaches, which is a notoriously dirty fruit. Means that pesticides get into it all the time. In the organic peaches, we found residue from 2 pesticides, but at very low levels. So it's still there, but very low levels. In the conventional peach sample, not organic, you guys ready for this? 7 pesticides. Residues from 7 pesticides. That means 7 different types of toxins were found in these peaches. So Dr. Green, analyze this for us. What does this mean?
Well, the results are clear. When you choose organic, you're choosing fewer pesticides. And your results are very consistent with what the USDA finds and other labs around the world find. Again and again, choosing organic, you get a smaller level of pesticides. And every bite of food that we eat is an investment in our bodies, or it's a debt we're taking out. We're going to have to repay somehow. And organic is a good investment when it comes to reducing pesticides.
How do you explain that there was still residue of 2 pesticides even in the organic peaches?
Yeah, that's a great question. They're there at very low levels for a couple of reasons. One is that there are some natural pesticides that are allowed in organic agriculture. But the other is that organic farms don't exist in isolation. The conventional farms that are around them will sometimes have pesticides that get into the air and drift or into the water. So organic is not part of the problem, it's part of the solution.
Now, I want to be clear about this. What I'm hearing from Dr. Green is that no matter what we eat, there's still a pretty good chance there's going to be some contamination of pesticides because we live in a globe that's all connected. I also want to be clear that the levels of pesticides we found in the food here, they tested below the levels that the government allows.
Right.
So that's okay. They're in the safe zone. The key question is that good enough for you and your families? Dr. Green, your thoughts?
So I can't look a person in the eye and say that those levels are safe. We just don't know enough. At real-world exposure levels, we have real health concerns and questions that are still out there. I think that some of the levels should be changed. And there's some pesticides, like the organophosphates, that I don't believe we need to be using anymore. Why add unnecessary toxins to the food that's becoming part of our bodies?
Dan, I'll speak to your point. As physicians, we just don't know.
Right.
And I don't want to panic everybody, but we're at the very beginning of knowing the true health impact of these chemicals. And let me make this clear to everybody, for your kids. Their little bodies are developing very rapidly. There's some very tentative times there. Their livers, which is where all the detoxing occurs, are very sensitive, and they process toxins differently than adults. Their underdeveloped immune systems provide far less protection than an adult's immune system. And frankly, I'm worried about all their organs, but especially their brains, because they are vulnerable at this critical moment of growth at young age. So that's great. Even the EPA is a moving target. They're changing their opinions of how much pesticide we can allow in our diet.
Yeah, the EPA is making this a major issue, and I'm really glad. They've already lowered the levels allowed on some pesticides, and I believe they'll push that bar forward. Pesticides may turn out to be the next lead. We used to all think when I was growing up that lead was fine, it wasn't affecting us. Then we learned it was affecting the brains, we got rid of it in gasoline, and everyone's IQ went up a little bit. I think we have potential for that.
Did it really?
Yeah.
Can you imagine that? I mean, making the kids dumb, maybe. Because of pesticide exposure. Wait, let me give you good news, because there are things you can do to make a difference. It turns out that kids who had previously had high levels of pesticide residue in their urine saw that level drop significantly after just 5 days of eating organic food. 5 days, folks. Well, while we're all figuring out the data, I think we've got some action steps. And I think your kids, all of our kids, deserve better than to be part of a national chemistry experiment. So I don't want anyone thinking that you need to eat less fruits and vegetables. We made that point really clearly. But I do think you can get your kids to eat healthier one way or the other by choosing the right foods to make organic. So I'm saying it clearly now. I want you to eat organic foods. And when we come back, I'm going to tell you exactly which ones to start with.
Unfortunately, the air we breathe in most parts of the Philippines is also higher than the safe level acceptable by the World Health Organization, and these pollutants increase the toxic load in our bodies. As you can see, our bodies are heavily burdened with accumulated toxic substances from the sugary beverages, food, and air that we breathe over the years, and unless we detoxify our bodies on a regular basis, we will be in grave danger of becoming sick with chronic illnesses. As the toxins increase, the amounts of fat in our bodies also increase. ProBalance is an effective detoxification product. If you are overweight, by going through this simple detoxification process with ProBalance, you can expect to lose weight. And the good news is, this can be achieved without dieting. Simply drink ProBalance 1 in the morning before breakfast and ProBalance 2 after dinner on a daily basis, and you will experience amazing results within days. ProBalance, an amazing detox and weight loss product without the need for dieting.